Atlantis, the complete story, relaxing history for deep sleep. A Sleepless Survivors production. Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through time with Sleepless Survivors. Tonight, we invite you to sink deeply into your pillows, to let your breathing slow and steady as we explore one of history's most enduring mysteries, the lost civilization of Atlantis, a place that may have existed in reality, or perhaps only in the realm of myth and imagination. Either way, its story has captivated humanity for over 2,000 years. So close your eyes now if you haven't already. Let the weight of the day drift away from your shoulders. We have plenty of time ahead. There is no rush, only the gentle unfolding of an ancient tale told in soft tones to carry you peacefully into rest. Chapter 1. The First Telling. Our story begins not in the depths of the ocean, but in the mind of a philosopher. It is approximately 360 BCE in ancient Athens. The great thinker Plato, already in his 70s, put stylus to papyrus to record a dialogue. He calls this work Timaeus, and it will be followed by another called Critias. These texts will become the only ancient sources for the legend of Atlantis. Picture, if you will, the scene Plato describes. It is a gathering of learned men in Athens. Socrates, Plato's beloved teacher, is present, along with Timaeus of Locri, Hermocrates and Critias. They are discussing the ideal state, the perfect society, and it is here that Critias begins to tell a remarkable story, one he claims was passed down through his family from the great Athenian lawgiver Solon. Solon, we are told, travelled to Egypt around 590 BCE. There, in the ancient city of Sais, he conversed with Egyptian priests, keepers of knowledge far more ancient than anything the Greeks possessed. These priests, according to the tale, told Solon of events that occurred 9,000 years before his time. 9,000 years. A span of time almost incomprehensible, stretching back into the mists of prehistory. The priests spoke of a great island nation that existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Today we call these pillars the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow passage between the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. But in Plato's time, they represented the edge of the known world, the boundary between civilization and the unknown. This island, the priests said, was called Atlantis, and it was larger than Libya and Asia combined. Imagine that for a moment, an island continent, vast beyond measure, sitting in the Western Ocean. The priests described it as a place of unimaginable wealth and power, a civilization that had achieved wonders the world had never seen before or since. Let your mind drift now, as we paint this picture together. Let the images form gently, without effort, as sleep begins to approach like a familiar friend. Chapter 2. The Island Paradise. According to Plato's account, Atlantis was no ordinary island. Its origins were divine. The god Poseidon, lord of the seas, fell in love with a mortal woman named Clito. She lived on this island, which at the time was inhabited but relatively undeveloped. Poseidon, desiring to protect his beloved, transformed the landscape itself. He shaped the island into a series of concentric rings, alternating between water and land. At the very centre he created a hill where Clito would dwell in safety. Around this central hill he carved 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land, each ring perfectly circular, creating a natural fortress that could not easily be breached. Picture these rings now, gentle listener. The water channels gleaming in the sun, perfectly still. The land rings rising gradually, lush with vegetation, and at the centre, the sacred hill, a place of peace and divine protection. From the union of Poseidon and Clito came 5 pairs of twin sons. The firstborn was named Atlas, and it was he who would become the first king of this island empire. His brothers and their descendants would rule over different portions of the realm, but Atlas held supremacy, and it was from his name that the island took its designation. Atlantis, the island of Atlas. The royal family and their descendants did not squander their divine heritage. Over generations they built upon the natural structure Poseidon had created. They constructed bridges across the water rings, creating passages that could be opened and closed. They dug a great canal from the outer ring all the way to the sea, allowing ships to sail directly into the heart of the city. The city itself became a marvel of engineering and artistry. The Atlanteans quarried stone from beneath the central island and from the outer and inner rings. Some of this stone was white, some black, and some red. and they used these varying colours to create buildings of stunning visual beauty, pleasing to the eye in their variety and craftsmanship. They covered the outer wall that circled the outermost ring of land with brass, making it gleam in the sunlight. The inner wall they covered with tin, so it shone with a different lustre, and the wall that surrounded the citadel itself, the innermost sanctum, they covered with orichalcum, a mysterious metal that Plato describes as glowing with a red light, second in value only to gold itself. Let yourself see this city now, as you drift closer to sleep. The walls gleaming in the sun, the canals reflecting the sky, ships moving peacefully through the waterways, everything ordered, everything beautiful, everything designed for both function and aesthetic pleasure. Chapter 3. The Great Temple. At the very heart of the city stood a temple to Poseidon, befitting the god who had founded this civilization. This was no ordinary temple. It was a structure of such size and magnificence that it staggers the imagination even today. The temple was a stadium in length, 300 feet wide and proportionate in height. The exterior was covered entirely in silver, except for the roof, which gleamed with gold. Inside, the ceiling was composed of ivory, decorated with gold, silver and orichalcum, creating a canopy that must have shimmered and glowed in the light of lamps and braziers. But the true wonder of the temple was the statue it housed. At its centre stood an image of Poseidon himself, so tall that his head nearly touched the ceiling. The god was depicted standing in a chariot, driving 6 winged horses, and around him were arranged 100 nereids, the sea nymphs who attended him, riding upon dolphins. The Atlanteans came to this temple to worship and to conduct the sacred business of state. Around the temple, they placed golden statues of all the original 10 kings and their wives, along with many other dedications from kings and private citizens, both from the city itself and from the foreign territories that Atlantis controlled. For Atlantis was not merely a single island city. Its influence extended far and wide. The kingdom controlled the entire island and many others besides. Its power reached across the ocean to the opposite continent. Within the Mediterranean, its dominion extended as far as Egypt and Tyrrhenia, the land we now call Italy. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Feel yourself sinking into this ancient world, where gods walked among mortals and cities gleamed with precious metals. There is no need to hold on to these images tightly. Let them float through your consciousness like clouds across a calm sky. Chapter 4. The Blessed Land. The island of Atlantis itself was blessed with natural abundance. The climate was temperate and favourable. Rain fell in abundance, filling the rivers and streams that flowed from the mountains at the island's centre, down toward the coastal plains and the sea. The soil was rich and fertile, capable of supporting diverse crops. The Atlanteans grew wheat and barley, vegetables of every kind and fruits both familiar and exotic. They cultivated forest for timber, which they used in their extensive construction projects. The trees also provided food for animals both wild and domesticated, and the animals themselves flourished on Atlantis. There were horses for riding and working, cattle for meat and milk, sheep for wool, birds of every description filled the air with song, and most remarkably there were elephants, great herds of them, roaming the marshes and forests, finding ample food and water in this paradise. The island provided not only food but also precious resources. There were metals of every kind in the mountains. Gold could be extracted from the earth. Silver and copper were abundant. And there was that mysterious orichalcum which the Atlanteans valued above all metals except gold, and which seems to have been unique to their island. For no one has been able to identify with certainty what this substance might have been. From these resources the Atlanteans built their civilization. They created not only their magnificent capital city with its concentric rings, but also a network of settlements across the entire island. They divided the land into regions, each ruled by one of the royal families descended from the original 10 kings. The main island was described as being rectangular in shape, measuring 3,000 stadia in one direction and 2,000 stadia in the other, at its greatest extent. To put that in modern measurements, we're speaking of an island roughly the size of Portugal, or perhaps larger. A substantial landmass, capable of supporting a large population. Around the entire island, they dug a great perimeter canal, 100 feet deep and more than 600 feet wide, running for over 1,000 miles. This canal collected water from the mountains and directed it around the plain, eventually emptying into the sea near the capital city. From this main canal they dug secondary channels that crisscrossed the plain, creating a network for irrigation and transportation. Imagine floating on one of these canals now, listener. The water moves slowly, gently. On either side, fields of grain wave in a soft breeze. In the distance, mountains rise toward the sky, their peaks sometimes shrouded in mist. You're lying in a boat, and the rocking motion lulls you deeper into relaxation. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just this moment, just this peace. Chapter 5. The Atlantean Society. The people of Atlantis organised themselves according to ancient traditions established by Poseidon and the first kings. The island was divided into 10 regions, each ruled by one of the royal lines, but it was understood that the firstborn of the line of Atlas held supremacy over the others, serving as High King over all. The kings met regularly to conduct the business of state and to consult on matters of law and governance. These meetings were held with great ceremony in the Temple of Poseidon. The ritual began with a hunt for bulls, which roamed freely within the sacred precincts of the temple. The 10 kings, armed only with wooden clubs and ropes, would pursue these bulls. When they captured one, they would lead it to the great bronze column that stood within the temple. This column was inscribed with the laws established by the first kings, laws that governed not only the relationship between the kingdom's rulers, but also their conduct toward their subjects. The bull would be sacrificed over the column, its blood mixing with wine in a sacred ceremony. Each king would then draw a cup of this mixture and pour a libation over the fire, swearing to uphold the laws and to judge according to the inscriptions on the column. They would not take up arms against one another, and they would come to each other's aid if any of their number was threatened. After the sacrifice and the oaths, darkness would fall. The kings would sit in judgment, wearing simple robes of blue, darker than the night itself. They would hear cases and render verdicts according to the ancient laws, and when morning came they would write their judgments on a golden tablet and dedicate it as a memorial. This ritual speaks to something important about Atlantean society, at least as Plato imagined it. These were not tyrants ruling by force alone. They governed according to law, according to tradition, according to a divine mandate that obligated them to justice and mutual cooperation. The people themselves were organised into military units based on the region where they lived. Each region was expected to provide a certain number of soldiers, chariots, and ships for the common defence. The plain alone could provide 60,000 military units, each consisting of multiple soldiers and support personnel. But for many generations, this military might was not used for conquest or oppression. Instead, the Atlanteans lived in prosperity and peace. They traded with other nations. They welcomed foreigners to their harbours. They shared their knowledge and their culture with the wider world. Their capital city bustled with activity. The great harbour was always filled with ships from every corner of the known world. The sounds of many languages filled the air as merchants haggled over prices, as sailors sang work songs, as travellers marvelled at the sights around them. The city's population was large and diverse. In addition to the Atlanteans themselves, there were immigrants from other lands who had come seeking opportunity and prosperity. There were craftsmen working in gold and silver. There were potters creating vessels both functional and beautiful. There were weavers producing textiles of remarkable quality. There were scholars and philosophers debating in public squares. There were priests maintaining the temples. There were musicians and poets entertaining in the courts of the wealthy. Let your mind wander through these streets now, dear listener, not as a task, but as a gentle dream. You are walking through the market. The sun is warm but not hot. A pleasant breeze comes from the sea. You hear laughter somewhere nearby. The smell of fresh bread drifts from a bakery. Everything is peaceful. Everything is well. Chapter 6. The Natural Wonders. Beyond the great city and the cultivated plains lay regions of remarkable natural beauty. The mountains that formed the spine of the island were covered in forests of cedar, pine, and oak. These forests were home to countless species of birds and animals. Streams cascaded down the mountainsides, forming waterfalls that caught the sunlight and created rainbows in the mist. In certain mountain valleys, the Atlanteans had discovered hot springs where mineral-rich water bubbled up from deep within the earth. They built bathhouses around these springs, creating places of healing and relaxation. Some springs were designated for the use of the kings, others for ordinary citizens, and still others for horses and other animals. The plains themselves, when not under cultivation, were grasslands where herds of wild horses roamed. The Atlanteans were renowned as horsemen, and their cavalry was considered among the finest in the ancient world. Young nobles would spend years learning to ride, to train horses to move as one with their mounts in both peace and war. Along the coasts there were beaches of fine sand where children played and fishermen brought in their catches. The fishing around Atlantis was extraordinarily good, for the waters teemed with every kind of sea creature. There were small fish swimming in great schools near the surface, and large fish prowling the depths. There were shellfish that could be gathered at low tide, their shells iridescent in the sun. There were creatures with 8 arms that the Greeks called octopuses, which the Atlanteans considered a delicacy. The Atlanteans were master sailors, their ships capable of voyaging great distances across the open ocean. They had learned to read the stars for navigation, to understand the patterns of winds and currents, to predict storms before they arrived. Their ships were sturdy and well designed, capable of carrying large cargoes safely across dangerous waters. Some of their voyages took them far to the south, to lands where the sun beat down with tremendous heat and people had skin darker than polished ebony. Other voyages took them north, to cold lands where ice floated in the sea and winter lasted for half the year. Still other expeditions sailed west, across the vast ocean, until they reached the opposite continent, which Plato mentions but does not describe in detail. What did they find on these voyages? What knowledge did they bring back? Plato does not tell us, leaving much to imagination. Perhaps they encountered other advanced civilizations. Perhaps they found only scattered tribes living simple lives close to nature. Perhaps they discovered plants and animals unknown in their home waters and brought specimens back to enrich their own land. Rest now in this vision of exploration and discovery. Let yourself drift on gentle waves, moving toward distant horizons where sea and sky meet. You are safe. You are calm. The motion of the waves is soothing, rhythmic, like breathing, like the beating of a heart at rest. Chapter 7. Arts and Knowledge. The Atlanteans were not merely builders and soldiers and sailors. They were also scholars and artists, constantly seeking to understand the world around them and to create beauty in all its forms. In their schools, children learned reading and writing, mathematics and geometry, music and poetry, history and philosophy. Education was considered essential for all citizens, not merely the wealthy elite. A person who could not read or calculate was considered incomplete, unable to fully participate in civic life. The Atlanteans studied the stars with great attention. They built observatories on mountaintops where the air was clear and the view unobstructed. They mapped the movements of the planets and noted the positions of prominent stars. They divided the year into seasons and months, understanding the relationship between celestial movements and earthly cycles. This astronomical knowledge served practical purposes. It helped them navigate on their long sea voyages. It told them when to plant and when to harvest. It predicted the coming of storms and the changing of seasons. But it also served a spiritual purpose, for they believed the heavens revealed something of the divine order that underlay all existence. They studied mathematics not merely for commerce, but for its own beauty. They understood geometric principles and used them in their architecture. They knew how to calculate areas and volumes. They understood ratios and proportions. Some Atlantean philosophers, according to legend, made discoveries in mathematics that would not be rediscovered for thousands of years. In medicine, the Atlanteans were advanced practitioners. They understood the importance of hygiene and cleanliness. They used herbs and minerals to treat various ailments. They performed surgery when necessary, though always as a last resort. They had physicians who specialized in different areas, some treating diseases of the body, others treating ailments of the mind. The hot springs scattered throughout the mountains were considered especially therapeutic. People suffering from joint pain, skin conditions, or general exhaustion would travel to these springs and spend weeks bathing in their healing waters. Temples to gods of healing stood near many of these springs, for the Atlanteans understood healing as both a physical and spiritual process. Music held a special place in Atlantean culture. Every major festival, every religious ceremony, every gathering of state was accompanied by music. They played stringed instruments somewhat like lyres and harps. They had wind instruments, both flutes and horns. They had drums and rattles for keeping rhythm. Professional musicians enjoyed high status in Atlantean society. The best were employed by the royal courts, composing pieces to commemorate important events or to honour the gods. But music was not only for professionals. Ordinary people sang while working, while celebrating, while grieving. Music wove through the fabric of daily life like a golden thread. Poetry, too, flourished in Atlantis. The ancient myths and histories were preserved not merely in writing, but in epic poems that could be recited from memory. Master poets would perform these epics at festivals, their voices rising and falling with the drama of the tales they told. Young people would memorize these poems, carrying forward the culture and values of their civilization. Visual arts reached high levels of sophistication. Atlantean sculptors worked in marble and bronze, creating statues of remarkable realism and beauty. Painters decorated the walls of temples and palaces with scenes from mythology and history. Craftsmen created jewellery of gold and silver, often incorporating gems and precious stones gathered from the mountains or traded from distant lands. Textiles from Atlantis were renowned throughout the ancient world. Weavers created fabrics of incredible complexity, with patterns that seemed to shift and change as the viewer moved. They had mastered the art of dyeing, producing colours of remarkable intensity and permanence. Purple dye, extracted from sea snails, was especially prized, and garments dyed in this royal colour could be worn only by kings and the highest priests. Let these images of beauty and learning fill your mind now, listener, but hold them lightly, without effort. You are an observer, watching as if from a great distance or a great height. Everything is peaceful, everything is whole, and you are drifting, toward the deep rest you deserve. Chapter 8. Religion and Spirituality. Religion permeated every aspect of Atlantean life. The people worshipped many gods, with Poseidon as the primary deity, but they also honoured other members of the divine pantheon. They built temples throughout their land, each dedicated to a different god or goddess. There was a temple to the goddess of wisdom, where scholars would go to seek insight before beginning important research. There was a temple to the god of war, where soldiers would make offerings before departing on military campaigns. There was a temple to the goddess of agriculture, where farmers would pray for good harvests and favourable weather. The priesthood formed a distinct class within Atlantean society. To become a priest required years of training and study. Candidates had to learn the proper rituals and ceremonies, the sacred texts and hymns, the mythology and theology that explained the relationship between humans and gods. They had to maintain ritual purity, following strict rules about diet, cleanliness and behaviour. The High Priest of Poseidon held special authority, second only to the king himself in matters of spiritual importance. This priest conducted the most sacred ceremonies, interpreted omens and prophecies, and advised the kings on matters where divine guidance was needed. The Atlanteans believed in an afterlife. When a person died, their body would be cremated with great ceremony. The ashes would be placed in an urn, often beautifully decorated and interred in family tombs. They believed the soul continued to exist after death, travelling to a realm where it would be judged according to how the person had lived. Those who had lived justly and piously would be rewarded with eternal peace in a paradise realm. Those who had lived wickedly would face punishment appropriate to their crimes. This belief in divine justice served as a powerful force for moral behaviour among the population. The Atlanteans celebrated numerous religious festivals throughout the year. Some were solemn occasions marked by fasting and prayer. Others were joyous celebrations, with music, dancing, feasting and games. The greatest festival of all occurred once every 5 years, when representatives from all 10 kingdoms would gather in the capital for a month-long celebration that included athletic competitions, musical performances, religious ceremonies and diplomatic negotiations. Dreams were considered significant, often containing messages from the gods. Temples employed specialists who interpreted dreams, helping people understand what the gods might be trying to communicate. If someone had a particularly vivid or disturbing dream, they might make a pilgrimage to a temple to seek interpretation and guidance. Prophecy played an important role in Atlantean spirituality. Certain individuals, usually priests or priestesses, were believed to have the ability to see the future or to communicate with the divine realm. These oracles were consulted on important matters of state. though their pronouncements were often ambiguous and subject to interpretation. The Atlanteans also practiced divination through various means. They observed the flight of birds, believing certain patterns held significance. They examined the organs of sacrificed animals, looking for signs and omens. They cast lots, or drew special marked stones from containers, interpreting the patterns that emerged. But alongside these formal religious practices, there existed a simpler, more personal spirituality. Families maintained household shrines where they honoured their ancestors and sought blessings for daily life. People offered prayers before meals, when setting out on journeys, when beginning new enterprises. They wore amulets and charms for protection, believing certain symbols had power to ward off evil or attract good fortune. Nature itself was considered sacred. Certain mountains were holy places where no one was permitted to hunt or cut trees. Certain groves of trees were set aside for worship and meditation. Rivers and springs were believed to be inhabited by divine spirits, and offerings were made to these water deities to ensure their continued blessing. Feel the peace of this sacred world now, listener, a world where everything is connected, where the divine presence flows through all things. You need not understand or analyze. Simply rest in this vision of wholeness and meaning. Your breath is slow and steady. Your body is relaxed. Sleep approaches on soft feet like a blessing long awaited. Chapter 9. Daily Life in Atlantis. Let us now walk through an ordinary day in the life of an ordinary Atlantean citizen. Not a king or a priest or a great warrior, but simply a person living their life in this remarkable civilization. Our citizen awakens with the dawn as sunlight streams through the window of their home. The houses of Atlantis are built of stone, with walls plastered and painted in pleasant colours. The morning is cool, and they wrap themselves in a light cloak before beginning the day. First comes a visit to the household, shrine, where they offer a brief prayer and a small offering of grain or wine. They honour their ancestors and ask for blessing on the day ahead. This is not a lengthy ceremony, merely a moment of connection with the sacred before turning to the practical matters of life. Breakfast is simple. There is bread, perhaps with olive oil and honey. There might be fruit from the orchards, or cheese from the family's goats. They drink water, or perhaps wine diluted with water as is the custom. The family eats together, discussing the tasks that lie ahead. Our citizen is a merchant, dealing in textiles imported from distant lands. After breakfast, they walk through the city toward their shop in the market district. The streets are already busy with activity. Workers are heading to the docks or to construction sites. Farmers are bringing produce to market. Children are making their way to school, carrying wax tablets for their lessons. The shop opens and customers begin to arrive. Some are looking for cloth to make garments for themselves or their families. Others are wealthy patrons seeking fine textiles for important occasions. Our merchant shows them various fabrics, explaining where each comes from and what makes it special. There is haggling over prices, friendly conversation about news and gossip, the pleasant rhythm of commerce. At midday, the shop closes for a few hours, as is customary during the heat of the day. Our merchant eats a light meal, then retires to a cool room in the back of the shop for rest. Outside, the city becomes quieter as people retreat from the sun. This is a time for sleep, for reading, for quiet conversation with family or friends. In the late afternoon, the shop reopens. More customers come and go. A ship has recently arrived from a distant land, and our merchant arranges to go to the docks tomorrow to examine its cargo, perhaps to bid on some of the exotic textiles it has brought. As evening approaches, the shop closes for the day. Our merchant walks home through streets that are becoming cooler and more pleasant. They stop at a bathhouse, where they pay a small fee to use the facilities. They wash away the sweat and dust of the day, relaxing in warm water before dressing in clean clothes. Dinner is the main meal of the day. The family gathers, and tonight they are joined by friends. There is fish caught fresh that morning and grilled with herbs. There are vegetables prepared in various ways. There is more bread, and wine that flows freely as the evening progresses. Conversation ranges across many topics. They discuss business and politics. They share news of mutual acquaintances. They debate philosophical questions. They tell stories and jokes. The atmosphere is warm and convivial, the bonds of friendship and family strengthening in the glow of lamplight. As the evening grows late, the guests depart. Our merchant and their family clean up from the meal, then prepare for bed. They might read for a while by lamplight, or simply talk quietly before sleep. They give thanks for another day of peace and prosperity. They offer prayers for the safety of their loved ones, and then they sleep, confident that tomorrow will bring another good day in the blessed land of Atlantis. This was life for many Atlanteans, not filled with grand adventures or dramatic events, but with the quiet satisfactions of work and family, friendship and community. A good life in a place that provided for its people, and asked only that they live according to justice and honour. Let yourself inhabit this peaceful existence now, listener. Feel the satisfaction of a day well spent, the comfort of home and family, the pleasure of simple food and good company. You're safe, you're content, and you're drifting deeper into rest with each breath, with each gentle heartbeat. Chapter 10. The beginning of decline. But no paradise lasts forever. As Plato tells the story, the Atlanteans began to change. The divine nature that had been so strong in them at first, inherited from their ancestor Poseidon, began to grow weaker. As it was diluted by mortal mixture through many generations, the human nature gained the upper hand. At first, this change was subtle. Perhaps the kings became a bit more concerned with their own power than with justice for their subjects. Perhaps the wealthy became a bit more focused on acquiring possessions than on living virtuously. Perhaps ordinary people became a bit more interested in pleasure than in duty. These small changes accumulated over generations. Where once the Atlanteans had been content with sufficiency, now they wanted excess. Where once they had valued wisdom and virtue, now they prized wealth and power. Where once they had lived in harmony with their neighbours, now they looked upon other nations with ambition and greed. The turning point came when the kings of Atlantis held a council and decided to expand their empire through conquest. They assembled their armies and their fleets. They sent messengers to the nations around the Mediterranean demanding submission and tribute. Many nations, terrified by the military might of Atlantis, complied, but the Atlanteans were not satisfied. They wanted more. They wanted to conquer the entire known world, to bring all peoples under their rule. Their empire expanded across the strait now called Gibraltar, through Libya and Egypt, through the islands of the Mediterranean. Finally, their ambitions brought them into conflict with Athens. According to Plato's telling, ancient Athens of 9,000 years before his time was very different from the Athens he knew. It was a land of virtuous warriors, living simply according to ancient laws, devoted to courage and justice rather than luxury and excess. When the Atlanteans threatened Athens and its allies, the Athenians did not submit. Instead, they organised resistance. Though outnumbered and outmatched in resources, the Athenians fought with valour and determination. They won victory after victory, driving back the Atlantean forces. But this war would not determine the ultimate fate of Atlantis. Something greater was at work. The gods themselves had noticed the moral decline of the Atlanteans. Zeus, king of the gods, called together a council. He decided that the Atlanteans must be punished for their hubris and wickedness, that they must be taught a lesson that would echo through the ages, and so, in a single day and night of terrible catastrophe, the island of Atlantis was destroyed. Earthquakes shook the land with unimaginable force. The ground itself split open. Buildings collapsed. The carefully constructed harbours and canals were wrecked beyond recognition. Then came the water. Whether it was massive waves from the sea or torrential rain from above, or both together, water engulfed the island. It rushed through the breached walls, flooded the plains, rose up the mountainsides. The Atlanteans fled in terror, but there was nowhere to go, no escape from the divine judgment that had been pronounced upon them. The island sank beneath the waves. The gleaming city with its concentric rings, the magnificent temple of Poseidon, the palaces and schools and theatres, the houses and shops and markets, everything vanished beneath the surface. The people, the animals, the plants, all were swept away. Where once a great civilization had flourished, now there was only water. And according to Plato, this is why the sea in that region became unnavigable. The sunken island created shallow waters full of mud and debris. Ships attempting to sail over what had once been Atlantis would run aground or be trapped in the thick mud that had once been fertile soil. The story ends there, in catastrophe and loss. A great civilization, blessed with every advantage, ultimately destroyed by its own moral failings. A warning perhaps to Plato's contemporaries and to all future generations about the dangers of hubris and the importance of virtue. Rest now in this sombre truth, listener. All things pass. All civilizations, no matter how mighty, eventually fall, but there is peace in this knowledge too. If nothing lasts forever, then our troubles are also temporary, our anxieties will pass, our pain will ease, and in the end we all return to the eternal rest from which we came. Chapter 11. The Search for Atlantis. When we wake from our journey through Plato's account, we must ask ourselves a question that has occupied scholars and dreamers for over 2,000 years. Was Atlantis real? Did it exist as a physical place? Or was it merely a philosophical allegory, a story Plato invented to illustrate his ideas about the ideal state and its corruption? Let us explore this question gently without urgency, as one might examine shells found on a beach, turning them over in the hand, admiring their patterns and colours. Plato presents the story as true history, passed down through Solon from the Egyptian priests. But many scholars, both in ancient times and today, have doubted this claim. Aristotle, Plato's own student, believed his teacher had invented Atlantis to serve his philosophical purposes. As Aristotle supposedly said, Plato made Atlantis appear and then made it disappear. The level of detail in Plato's account seems almost too elaborate for pure invention. He provides specific measurements for the city and the island. He describes the political structure, the military organisation, the agricultural output in precise terms. He names specific places like the Pillars of Hercules as geographical reference points, and yet some of those same details create problems for those who would take the story literally. An island larger than Libya and Asia combined, located in the Atlantic Ocean, sinking in a day and night, 9,000 years before Solon's visit to Egypt, placing the destruction of Atlantis around 9600 BCE. That would be during the Stone Age, long before the development of the kind of advanced civilization Plato describes. Some have suggested that Plato exaggerated the timescale, that perhaps Atlantis existed much more recently than he claimed. Others propose that the numbers in the text have been mistranslated or corrupted over centuries of copying, and that the true figures were much smaller. For those determined to find a physical location for Atlantis, countless theories have been proposed. Some place it in the Mediterranean, identifying it with the Minoan civilization on Crete, or the island of Santorini, which was devastated by a volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE. The Minoans did have an advanced civilization, with impressive architecture, extensive trade networks, and strong maritime power. The destruction of Santorini by volcanic eruption could have inspired the story of a great island civilization destroyed in a single day and night. Others have looked beyond the Mediterranean. Some propose locations in the Atlantic Ocean proper, perhaps near the Azores or the Canary Islands. They point to underwater formations that could, with imagination, be interpreted as ruins of ancient structures. Some theorize that Atlantis was part of a larger landmass that once existed in the Atlantic, but has since subsided beneath the waves due to geological processes operating over millennia. Still others place Atlantis in more exotic locations. Some identify it with ancient civilizations in the Americas, suggesting that Plato's mention of a continent beyond Atlantis refers to the Americas themselves, and that Atlantis was a mid-Atlantic waypoint between Europe and the New World. They point to similarities between pyramid construction in Egypt and in Mesoamerica, suggesting possible transatlantic contact in ancient times. Some theorists place Atlantis in the North Sea, identifying it with Doggerland, a landmass that once connected Britain to continental Europe before being submerged at the end of the last ice age. Others look to the Black Sea, suggesting that Atlantis was destroyed when the Mediterranean broke through and flooded what had been a lower-lying freshwater lake. There are theories placing Atlantis in Antarctica, proposing that the continent was ice-free in ancient times and hosted an advanced civilization before shifting to its current polar position. There are theories locating it in the Indian Ocean, in Southeast Asia, in the Caribbean, even in the North Sea near Helgoland. Each theory has its proponents who marshal evidence with varying degrees of scholarly rigour. Some are based on genuine archaeological findings and serious geological research. Others rely more heavily on creative interpretation and wishful thinking, and some venture into the realm of pure speculation, incorporating elements of ancient astronauts, lost technologies, or mystical powers. The truth, most likely, is that Atlantis as Plato described it never existed. The story was his creation, a philosophical parable dressed in the garb of ancient history to give it weight and authority. Plato was not writing a history textbook. He was a philosopher, using story to explore ideas about politics, ethics, and human nature. The Atlantis story allowed him to examine questions that concerned him deeply. What makes a society just? What causes civilizations to decline? How should power be organized and controlled? What is the relationship between material prosperity and moral virtue? These were the real subjects of his inquiry, and Atlantis was the vehicle he chose for exploring them. But even if Atlantis was never real, the story has taken on a life of its own. It has captured imaginations across millennia, inspiring countless retellings, reimaginings, and searches. Perhaps this enduring fascination tells us something important about human nature itself, our need for mystery, for lost golden ages, for proof that something greater than what we know is possible. Let these questions rest now, unanswered and untroubled. Some mysteries are meant to remain mysterious. Some stories are more powerful for never being completely resolved. Breathe deeply, and let uncertainty become comfortable, become peaceful, become a gentle companion to your rest. Chapter 12. Atlantis in Legend and Literature. After Plato, the story of Atlantis lived on, evolving and transforming with each generation that encountered it. In the centuries following Plato's death, other ancient writers mentioned Atlantis, though usually with skepticism. The historian Crantor, writing about a century after Plato, claimed to have seen in an Egyptian temple the very columns on which the story of Atlantis was recorded, but no trace of these columns has ever been found, and Crantor's account is known only from references in later texts. The geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century BCE, discussed Atlantis briefly, treating it as a literary invention rather than historical fact. He quoted Aristotle's dismissive comment and seemed to agree with that assessment. Pliny the Elder, the Roman natural historian, mentioned islands in the Atlantic that some identified with remnants of Atlantis. But he expressed doubt about the more extravagant claims, while acknowledging that islands could indeed be destroyed by natural catastrophes. Plutarch, the Greek biographer and philosopher writing around 100 CE, mentioned Atlantis in passing when discussing Egyptian lore, but added little to Plato's original account. The Neo-Platonist philosophers of later centuries read the Atlantis story allegorically, interpreting it as representing the soul's journey or the relationship between the spiritual and material worlds. For centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire, Atlantis was largely forgotten in the West. The story survived in manuscript copies of Plato's dialogues preserved in monasteries and libraries, but few people read it, and fewer still speculated about its historical reality. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in classical texts, and with it, a revival of curiosity about Atlantis. When European explorers began crossing the Atlantic and discovering the Americas, some wondered if these new lands were related to Plato's story. Francis Bacon's utopian work, New Atlantis, published in 1627, imagined a perfect society existing in the Americas, though it was clearly a philosophical exercise rather than a literal claim. The 19th century saw an explosion of Atlantis theories, many wildly speculative. Ignatius Donnelly's 1882 book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, argued that Atlantis was real, and that it was the origin point for all human civilization. His ideas, though lacking scholarly rigour, captured popular imagination and sparked a wave of Atlantis enthusiasm that continues to this day. The 20th century brought Atlantis into popular culture through novels, films, television shows, and comic books. It became a staple of adventure fiction and science fiction, often depicted as possessing advanced technology far beyond that of the ancient world Plato described. In these retellings, Atlantis might have had flying machines, death rays, power crystals, or other anachronistic elements. Some New Age movements adopted Atlantis into their cosmologies, presenting it as a spiritually advanced civilization whose wisdom has been lost but might be recovered through meditation, channeling, or other esoteric practices. These interpretations often blend Plato's original story with elements from other mythologies, creating a syncretic narrative that bears little resemblance to any historical culture. Despite, or perhaps because of, all this creative elaboration, the core story retains its power. A great civilization rose to unprecedented heights, blessed with advantages beyond measure, but its people became corrupted by their own success, by pride and greed, and the lust for power, and so they were destroyed, wiped from existence in a single catastrophic event, leaving behind only memories and mysteries. It is a story we see repeated, in different forms, across human history and literature. The Tower of Babel reaching too high and being struck down. Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed for their wickedness, the Roman Empire collapsing under the weight of its own decadence. These stories resonate because they speak to universal human concerns about hubris, moral decay, and the fragility of even the mightiest accomplishments. Rest in these echoes now, these reverberations across time. Stories told and retold, each generation finding in them meanings relevant to their own age. You are part of this continuous stream, this river of human consciousness flowing from past to future. Let yourself be carried gently on its current, toward the peaceful depths of sleep. Chapter 13. The Psychology of Lost Civilizations. Why do stories of lost civilizations hold such enduring appeal? Why does Atlantis, along with Lemuria, Mu, Shangri-La, El Dorado, and countless other legendary places, continue to fascinate us? Perhaps it speaks to a deep human longing for something better than what we have. The mundane world, with all its problems and limitations, can feel constraining. We want to believe that somewhere, at some time, things were different. That humanity once achieved something greater, something more beautiful, more just, more harmonious than anything we see around us now. Lost civilizations represent a kind of Eden, a paradise from which we have fallen. If such places existed once, perhaps they could exist again. Perhaps we could rediscover lost knowledge, lost wisdom, lost harmony. The search for Atlantis becomes, in a sense, a search for something lost within ourselves. Some better version of humanity we hope still exists, dormant but recoverable. There is also something appealing about mystery itself. In an age where so much has been mapped, catalogued and explained, we crave the unknown. We want there to be blank spaces on the map, regions where anything might be possible. Atlantis provides that space, that possibility of wonder. The story also appeals to our sense of justice and meaning in the universe. The Atlanteans were punished for their moral failings. Their destruction was not random but purposeful, a response to their corruption. This narrative suggests that the universe operates according to moral laws, that virtue is ultimately rewarded and vice punished, even if it takes divine intervention to make it so. For those who feel powerless or marginalized in their own societies, stories of lost civilizations can be empowering. If our ancestors once achieved great things that have been forgotten or suppressed, perhaps we too have hidden potential waiting to be unlocked. Perhaps the current order, with all its injustices, is not the natural or inevitable state of affairs, but merely one moment in a larger cycle of rise and fall. Some find in Atlantis a critique of their own civilization. If the Atlanteans fell because of greed, materialism, and aggressive militarism, what does that say about contemporary societies exhibiting similar traits? The story becomes a warning, a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in prosperity and power. But there is also something comforting in the idea of impermanence. If even mighty Atlantis fell, then our own troubles, our own failings are also temporary. Civilizations rise and fall, empires come and go, the wheel turns, and what is up will eventually be down, just as what is down will rise again. There is a kind of cosmic justice in this, a reassurance that nothing, good or bad, lasts forever. As you contemplate these psychological dimensions, listener, feel yourself letting go of the need for certainty. It doesn't matter whether Atlantis was real. What matters is what the story evokes in us, what it reveals about our hopes and fears, our longings and anxieties. Let these thoughts drift through your mind like clouds, casting interesting shadows but not demanding your sustained attention. You are relaxed, you are peaceful, you are sinking deeper into restful sleep. Chapter 14. The Science of Catastrophe. While Atlantis itself may be mythical, the kind of catastrophe Plato described is not. Throughout Earth's history, civilizations have indeed been destroyed by natural disasters, sometimes with shocking suddenness. Consider volcanic eruptions. The explosion of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE buried the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under ash and pumice, preserving them in a moment of time for future archaeologists to discover. The eruption of Krakatoa in 1883 was heard thousands of miles away and generated tsunamis that killed tens of thousands of people. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 was so powerful it affected global climate, causing the Year Without a Summer in 1816. The eruption that destroyed the island of Santorini around 1600 BCE was one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history. It created tsunamis that devastated coastal settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean. It buried the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri under volcanic ash, much like Pompeii centuries later. It may have contributed to the decline of the Minoan civilization, one of the most advanced cultures of the Bronze Age. Could this event have inspired the Atlantis story? The timing is wrong. The Santorini eruption occurred around 1600 BCE, not the 9600 BCE that Plato mentioned. But if Plato or his sources confused the timeline, or if the numbers were altered in transmission, the Santorini catastrophe could indeed have been the kernel of truth around which the Atlantis legend grew. Earthquakes too have destroyed cities and killed countless people throughout history. The ancient world was well acquainted with seismic disasters. The city of Pompeii was damaged by an earthquake 17 years before the volcanic eruption finished it off. The ancient Greek city of Helike sank beneath the sea after an earthquake in 373 BCE, just a few years before. Plato wrote about Atlantis. Could he have had Helike in mind? Tsunamis generated by undersea earthquakes can be even more devastating. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami killed over 200,000 people. The 2011 tsunami in Japan caused not only massive loss of life, but also the nuclear disaster at Fukushima. Ancient peoples living near coastlines would have experienced such events and passed down stories of entire settlements being swept away by walls of water. Floods, whether from tsunamis, storm surges, or river flooding, feature prominently in the mythologies of cultures worldwide. The biblical story of Noah's Ark, the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, Hindu texts describing the Matsya avatar of Vishnu, Greek myths of Deucalion and Pyrrha, all tell of great floods that destroyed most of humanity, with only a few survivors preserved to repopulate the earth. Some of these flood myths may preserve memories of the end of the last ice age, when rising sea levels submerged coastal areas where humans had lived. Doggerland, the landmass connecting Britain to Europe, was gradually flooded as glaciers melted and sea levels rose. People living there would have witnessed over generations the slow encroachment of the sea, the loss of hunting grounds and settlements. Could Atlantis represent a cultural memory of such events, compressed and mythologized into a story of sudden catastrophe? It's possible, though unprovable. What we can say with certainty is that the destruction of civilizations by natural disaster is not merely the stuff of legend. It has happened repeatedly throughout human history, and it will happen again. Understanding this fragility, this vulnerability of human civilization to natural forces, might make us more humble, more aware of our place in the larger scheme of things. We build our cities, our monuments, our complex societies, but we do so on a planet that operates according to its own rhythms, indifferent to our ambitions and achievements. Let this perspective wash over you now like a wave, neither frightening nor disturbing, but simply true. We are small in the face of geological time, temporary in the face of natural forces. And in this smallness, this temporariness, there is a kind of peace. We need not carry the weight of permanence. We can simply be, for our brief moment, doing what we can with what we have. Chapter 15. Atlantis as Utopia and Warning. Plato's Atlantis serves a dual function in his philosophical project. In its early virtuous phase, it represents an ideal society, or at least a society with certain ideal qualities. But in its later corrupted phase, it becomes a warning about what happens when societies abandon virtue in favour of power and wealth. The early Atlantis, as described by Plato, has many features that would appear in later utopian visions. There is order and structure, with the concentric rings providing both defence and a clear physical expression of social organisation. There is abundance, with the fertile land providing more than enough for everyone's needs. There is beauty, with architecture and art raising life above mere survival, to something aesthetically pleasing. The government of Atlantis, with its 10 kings bound by sacred oaths to uphold ancient laws and to consult together on major decisions, represents a kind of constitutional monarchy that might have appealed to Plato. It is not democracy, which Plato distrusted, but neither is it tyranny. Power is distributed and balanced, restrained by tradition and religious obligation. The ritual of the bull sacrifice, where the kings must capture the animal using only clubs and ropes, is particularly interesting. It suggests that even the most powerful must prove themselves through physical courage and skill. They cannot simply command others to do dangerous work while remaining safely apart. They must participate directly, risking themselves as their subjects do. The emphasis on education, with all citizens learning not just practical skills but also music, mathematics and philosophy, reflects Plato's belief that a good society requires educated citizens. Ignorance breeds tyranny. Knowledge makes possible both individual flourishing and collective justice. But this ideal society contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction. The Atlanteans' very success, their wealth and power, becomes the source of their downfall. They forget that their prosperity was a gift, not something they achieved solely through their own efforts. They forget the limits that should constrain ambition. They come to believe that they deserve their advantages, and that they have the right to take whatever they want from others. This is the warning Plato wants to convey. No society, no matter how well ordered, is safe from moral corruption. Virtue must be actively maintained through education, through law, through religious observance, through constant vigilance against the temptations of wealth and power. The moment a society becomes complacent, believing its prosperity is permanent and deserved, decline begins. The destruction of Atlantis is divine punishment, but it's also a natural consequence. A society built on injustice cannot stand indefinitely. The gods may deliver the final blow, but the Atlanteans destroyed themselves through their choices, their priorities, their values. The earthquake and flood are merely the external manifestation of an internal collapse that was already complete. This reading of the Atlantis story has influenced utopian and dystopian literature for centuries. Thomas More's Utopia, published in 1516, imagines an ideal island society much as Plato did, though with different specific features. But More was also aware of the fragility of his imagined perfection. His Utopia, like Plato's Atlantis, exists in isolation, protected from the corrupting influences of the outside world, but also unrealistic, unable to survive contact with reality. Later dystopian works, from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World to George Orwell's 1984, explore what happens when utopian dreams go wrong, when the pursuit of order and prosperity leads to oppression and dehumanization. These works echo Plato's insight that good intentions are not enough, that the road to destruction can be paved with aspirations toward perfection. The Atlantis story reminds us to be skeptical of any claim that a perfect society has been or could be achieved. All human institutions are imperfect because humans are imperfect. All societies contain within themselves tendencies toward both good and evil, justice and injustice, creation and destruction. Eternal vigilance, constant effort toward virtue, humble acknowledgement of our limitations, these are necessary if civilizations are to endure. But even with all these efforts, nothing lasts forever. Civilizations rise and fall. What matters is not whether we can create something permanent, but whether we can create something good, something beautiful, something just, for however long it lasts. This is the melancholy wisdom at the heart of the Atlantis story. Rest in this wisdom now, listener. Do not strive for the impossible. Do not burden yourself with the demand for permanence. Simply be present in this moment, breathing slowly, relaxing deeply, allowing sleep to come as naturally as night follows day. Chapter 16. Modern Echoes of Atlantis. The Atlantis story continues to resonate in our own time, perhaps more than ever. In an age of climate change, environmental degradation, and growing awareness of how fragile our civilization might be, the image of a great society destroyed by catastrophe feels uncomfortably relevant. We live in a time of unprecedented technological power and material abundance, at least for some portion of humanity. We have achieved things that would have seemed like magic to our ancestors. We can communicate instantly across the globe. We can fly through the air and venture into space. We have extended human lifespans and cured diseases that once killed millions. We have harnessed incredible sources of energy, and yet, like the Atlanteans in their decline, we face questions about how we use this power. Are we deploying our capabilities wisely? Are we living sustainably? Or are we consuming resources at a rate that cannot be maintained? Are we treating other peoples and nations with justice? Or are we driven by the same aggressive acquisitiveness that doomed Atlantis? The threat of climate change, in particular, evokes the Atlantis story. Rising sea levels may indeed submerge coastal cities and island nations, just as Atlantis was submerged. Extreme weather events, hurricanes, floods, droughts, wildfires, are becoming more frequent and severe. The comfortable stability we have known might not last. Unlike the Atlanteans, we cannot claim ignorance. We have scientists warning us of the consequences of our actions. We have data showing how the climate is changing and why. We understand the mechanisms by which greenhouse gas emissions trap heat in the atmosphere. We know what we would need to do to mitigate the worst effects. The question is whether we will act on this knowledge, or whether, like the Atlanteans, we will continue on our current path until catastrophe forces change upon us. Will we prove ourselves wiser than Plato's fictional civilization, or will future generations tell stories of our time as a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when societies prioritize short-term gain over long-term survival? There are other modern echoes as well. The growing inequality within and between nations recalls the way Atlantis stratified into rulers and ruled. The rise of authoritarianism in various parts of the world echoes the Atlanteans' turn away from justice and law toward the naked pursuit of power. The displacement of populations by war and environmental disaster reminds us of the refugees who must have fled as Atlantis sank. But there are hopeful signs as well. The spread of education worldwide, the growing awareness of environmental issues, the movements for social justice, the development of renewable energy technologies, these suggest that we need not follow the path of Atlantis to its conclusion. We can learn from our mistakes, we can change course, we can choose differently. The Atlantis story in this reading becomes not a prophecy of inevitable doom, but a call to awareness and action. It asks us to examine our values, our priorities, our choices. It reminds us that prosperity and power bring not just benefits, but also responsibilities. It warns us that the greatest threats to civilization often come not from outside enemies, but from internal moral decay. Whether we heed this warning remains to be seen. But the fact that the story still speaks to us, still seems relevant after more than 2 millennia, suggests that Plato touched on something fundamental about the human condition. We are capable of building remarkable things, but we are also capable of destroying what we build. The choice between these possibilities is always present, in every generation, in every society, in every individual. As you reflect on these modern parallels, let any anxiety or worry flow out of you with each exhale. You are not responsible for solving all the world's problems tonight. You have done what you could today, and tomorrow you will do what you can then. For now, rest. Let your mind be still. Let your body be comfortable. Let sleep come and restore you. Chapter 17, The Eternal Return. In some philosophies and mythologies, history is not linear but cyclical. Civilizations rise and fall, but from their ashes, new civilizations emerge. The wheel turns, and what was old becomes new again. This cyclical view offers a different perspective on the Atlantis story. If we imagine that Atlantis was not unique, that other civilizations before it rose to similar heights, and then fell, and that civilizations after it would do the same, then the story becomes less about one specific society and more about a pattern that repeats throughout human history. Each cycle begins in simplicity and hardship. People struggle to survive, to build shelter, to find food. But through cooperation and innovation, they gradually improve their circumstances. They develop agriculture, allowing them to stay in one place and accumulate surplus. They build towns and eventually cities. They develop writing, mathematics, art, philosophy. As the civilization matures, it enjoys a golden age. This is the height of cultural achievement, when great works of art and literature are created, when scientific and philosophical insights emerge, when the society seems to have found a stable, sustainable way of life. This is Atlantis in its prime, Athens in the age of Pericles, Rome under the good emperors, any civilization at its peak. But the Golden Age contains the seeds of decline. Success breeds complacency. Wealth leads to decadence. Power corrupts. The virtues that built the civilization, hard work, cooperation, justice, moderation, are gradually abandoned in favour of easier, more selfish ways of living. The decline may be gradual or sudden, but it is inevitable. Eventually the civilization falls. It may be destroyed by external enemies, but usually these enemies can only prevail because the civilization has already weakened itself from within, or it may fall to natural disaster, to plague, to economic collapse, to any of the countless ways that complex societies can fail. But after the fall comes a new beginning. The survivors pick up the pieces and start again. They remember some of what was lost, but much is forgotten. They must rediscover, reinvent, rebuild. And so the cycle begins anew. This cyclical view can be depressing. It suggests that all our efforts will ultimately come to nothing, that we cannot escape the pattern. But it can also be liberating. If rise and fall are natural, inevitable parts of an eternal cycle, then we need not fear failure or loss so greatly. We are part of something larger than any individual civilization, a continuous process of creation and destruction that has no beginning and no end. Chapter 18. The Wisdom of Impermanence. In the great cycles of rise and fall, of creation and destruction, there lies a profound teaching about the nature of existence itself. The Buddhists speak of impermanence, the truth that nothing remains fixed and unchanging. All composite things eventually dissolve. All gatherings eventually disperse. All that is built will eventually crumble. This is not a pessimistic view, though it may seem so at first. Rather, it is an invitation to hold things lightly, to appreciate what we have while we have it, without clinging desperately to what cannot be held forever. The beauty of a flower is enhanced, not diminished, by knowing it will fade. The preciousness of a moment is intensified by its fleeting nature. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, teaches us this lesson. Here was a civilization that seemed permanent, that seemed destined to last forever. Its walls were strong, its power was vast, its wealth was inexhaustible, and yet, in a single day and night, it was gone. All the careful planning, all the magnificent construction, all the accumulated wisdom and art swept away as if it had never been. But consider what remains. The physical city is gone, but the story survives. The buildings have dissolved into the sea, but the memory persists. The people have long since died, but the lessons they teach us continue. In some sense, then, Atlantis is more alive now than it ever was, because it lives in countless minds, inspiring countless thoughts and dreams and stories. This is the paradox of impermanence. By letting go of physical form, something can transcend its original limitations. The historical Atlantis, if it existed, would have been limited to a specific time and place. But the mythical Atlantis can be anywhere, can be any time, can mean whatever each generation needs it to mean. Perhaps this is true for all things. When we release our grip, when we accept that nothing lasts forever, we free ourselves and others to experience each moment fully, without the anxiety of trying to make it permanent. The parent who clings too tightly to a child prevents that child from growing. The lover who demands promises of forever often destroys the very love they seek to preserve. The civilization that believes itself eternal may be blind to the changes it needs to make to adapt and survive. Wisdom, then, lies not in building things that last forever, for nothing can, but in building well for now, creating beauty and justice and meaning in this present moment, accepting that others will come after us and build differently, according to their own needs and visions. The Atlanteans, in their pride, forgot this truth. They believed their glory would last forever, that they had achieved something beyond the reach of time and change. This belief, ironically, hastened their fall. Had they remained humble, had they remembered that all things pass, they might have governed more wisely, lived more virtuously, and perhaps endured longer, though still not forever, for nothing does. As you rest now, listener, feel this truth in your body. Notice how your breath comes and goes, each breath unique, each breath unrepeatable. Notice how thoughts arise in your mind and then dissolve, replaced by other thoughts. Notice how sensations in your body shift and change, how nothing remains exactly the same from one moment to the next. This is the nature of existence, everything flowing, everything changing, everything temporary. And in this endless flow, there is a kind of peace. You need not hold on so tightly. You need not fear the changes that come. You're part of the great river of existence, and the river knows where it is going. Chapter 19. The Gift of Mystery. There is something valuable in not knowing, in not having all answers neatly wrapped up and delivered. The mystery of Atlantis, the fact that we cannot say with certainty whether it was real or mythical, serves a purpose beyond the simple satisfaction of curiosity. Mystery invites us in. It asks us to participate, to imagine, to interpret. A story that is completely explained, with every detail pinned down and verified, becomes closed, finished, complete. There is nothing more for us to do with it except accept it as given. But a mystery remains open, inviting each new generation to explore it afresh, to find in it meanings relevant to their own time and circumstances. The scholars who search for physical evidence of Atlantis are engaged in a legitimate pursuit, but perhaps the ultimate value of Atlantis lies not in what they might find, but in the searching itself. The quest leads them to study ancient civilizations, to explore underwater archaeology, to understand geological processes, to think about how catastrophes might destroy evidence of past societies. All of this knowledge has value regardless of whether Atlantis is ever found. Similarly, those who interpret Atlantis symbolically or philosophically are enriched by their engagement with the story, even if, especially if, their interpretations differ from one another. One person might see in Atlantis a warning about environmental destruction. Another might see a meditation on political corruption. A third might see a reflection on the relationship between technology and wisdom. All of these readings can coexist, each valid in its own way, each offering insights that the others might miss. This multiplicity of meaning is possible precisely because the truth about Atlantis remains uncertain. If we knew exactly what Plato intended, if we had proof positive of what really happened, the story would lose much of its power. It would become a historical footnote, interesting perhaps to specialists but lacking the universal resonance it currently possesses. Mystery also teaches us humility. We do not know everything. We cannot know everything. There are questions that may never be answered, truths that may remain forever hidden. This is not a failure or a deficiency. It is simply the condition of being finite creatures in an infinite universe. In our daily lives, we often demand certainty, clarity, definitive answers. We want to know what will happen, what we should do, whether our choices are right or wrong. We want guarantees and assurances, but life rarely provides these things. Life is uncertain, ambiguous, open-ended. The story of Atlantis can teach us to be more comfortable with uncertainty, to sit with questions that have no easy answers, to appreciate mystery rather than always demanding solutions, to understand that not knowing can be its own kind of wisdom. There is a Zen teaching that speaks of beginner's mind, the attitude of openness and curiosity that comes from not already knowing the answer, the expert. Having mastered their field, may become rigid and closed, seeing only what they expect to see. But the beginner, precisely because they do not know, remains open to surprise, to new possibilities, to truths that lie outside established categories. Atlantis invites us to maintain beginner's mind. No matter how many books we have read about it, how many theories we have studied, how carefully we have examined Plato's text, we still do not know for certain. We can still be surprised. We can still discover new meanings and new questions. Rest in this not knowing now, listener. You do not need to figure everything out tonight. You do not need answers to all your questions. You can simply be here, in this moment, breathing, resting, allowing sleep to come without forcing it, without demanding it, simply remaining open to its approach like a child awaiting a friend. Chapter 20. The Architecture of Dreams. Let us return now to the image of Atlantis itself, not as a historical puzzle or philosophical problem, but simply as a vision, a dream city crafted in words and living in imagination. Close your eyes and see it once more. The concentric circles of land and water gleaming in the sun, the great wall of brass surrounding the outer ring, reflecting light like a mirror, the inner wall of tin shining with its own cooler radiance, and at the centre, the citadel wall covered with orichalcum, glowing with that mysterious red light Plato describes. Cross the bridges that span the water rings. Feel the gentle sway beneath your feet. Hear the soft sound of water lapping against the stone supports. Ships pass beneath you, their sails filled with wind, their crews calling out to one another in languages from across the known world. Enter the city itself. The streets are broad and well paved, lined with buildings constructed from stone of three colours, white and black and red, arranged in pleasing patterns. The buildings are not all the same height or design. There is variety here, individuality within an overall harmony. You hear the sounds of a living city, merchants calling out their wares, musicians playing on street corners, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer on metal, the laughter of children at play, the gentle splash of fountains in courtyards and public squares, the smell of bread baking, of flowers blooming in carefully tended gardens, of the sea, always the sea, its salt tang carried on every breeze, of incense burning in temples, of horses and leather and sweat and life. Walk toward the great temple at the city's heart. The closer you come, the more impressive it becomes. Its size is staggering, larger than any building you have ever seen. The silver walls gleam blindingly bright in the afternoon sun. The golden roof seems to float above, too radiant to look at directly. Enter through the massive bronze doors. Inside, the temperature drops pleasantly. The air is cool and still, scented with incense and candle wax. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dimmer light. The ceiling above is a wonder of ivory and precious metals, intricately carved and inlaid with patterns that seem to shift and move in the flickering lamplight. The floor beneath your feet is polished marble, smooth and cool, reflecting the glow from above. And there, at the far end of the temple, stands the great statue of Poseidon. Even from this distance, its size is overwhelming. The god stands in his chariot, pulled by 6 winged horses captured in mid-flight. The sculptor has rendered every detail with breathtaking skill. You can see the individual feathers on the horses' wings, the muscles beneath their skin, the determination in their eyes. Around Poseidon are the Nereids, 100 sea nymphs riding dolphins. Each figure is unique, each face expressing a different emotion: joy, serenity, playfulness, wisdom. The sculptor must have worked for years, perhaps decades, to create such a masterpiece. You stand before this wonder, and you feel something shift within you. Whether you believe in gods or not, there is something here that touches the sacred, that connects you to something larger than yourself. This is what human beings can create when they dedicate themselves fully, when they pour their skill and passion and devotion into a work that will outlast their own brief lives. But then you remember, this temple, if it ever existed, is gone now. The statue has dissolved into the sea. The priests who tended it are dust. The worshippers who prayed here have been dead for millennia. All of this beauty, all of this grandeur, all of this carefully crafted magnificence, gone. And yet, in another sense, it remains. Because you can still see it, can still walk through it in imagination. The physical temple may be gone, but the idea of the temple persists. Perhaps this is what lasts. Not stone and metal, but vision and memory, story and dream. Let this vision cradle you now, listener. Let yourself rest in this dream city, this place that may never have existed except in the imagination, but which exists there more vividly than many real places. You are safe here. You are peaceful here. The ancient stones hold you gently as you drift deeper into sleep. Chapter 21. The Keepers of Memory. In every culture, there are those whose role is to remember, to preserve the stories and wisdom of the past, to carry forward the accumulated knowledge of their people. In Plato's telling, the Egyptian priests served this function, maintaining records that stretched back thousands of years, far beyond the memory of the Greeks. These keepers of memory serve a vital function in any society. Without them, each generation would have to start anew, rediscovering truths that had already been learned, repeating mistakes that had already been made. The accumulated wisdom of the ages would be lost, and humanity would remain forever in its infancy. In oral cultures, before writing became widespread, this role required extraordinary dedication. Stories, histories, songs, and laws had to be memorized precisely and transmitted accurately from generation to generation. A single error, compounded over time, could corrupt the entire tradition. Those who served as memory keepers underwent rigorous training, spending years mastering the material they would be responsible for preserving. With the invention of writing, the task became both easier and more complex. Easier, because information could be recorded and consulted rather than held entirely in human memory. More complex, because the sheer volume of material that could be preserved increased exponentially. Libraries became necessary, great repositories of written knowledge where scrolls and books were collected, catalogued and maintained. The Library of Alexandria, founded in Egypt in the 3rd century BCE, not long after Plato wrote about Atlantis, became the most famous such repository in the ancient world. It sought to collect all the world's knowledge, to create a complete record of human learning. Scholars came from across the Mediterranean to study there. Copies of books from every land were acquired and added to the collection, but the Library of Alexandria, like Atlantis itself, was eventually destroyed. Exactly when and how remains unclear. The destruction may have happened gradually over centuries rather than in a single, catastrophic event, but the result was the same. Countless works were lost forever. We know many of these lost works only by their titles, mentioned in texts that survived. We know that plays by Sophocles and Euripides existed beyond the handful we still have. We know that mathematical treatises, historical accounts, philosophical works beyond number once existed, but the texts themselves are gone. This loss reminds us that memory is fragile. The thread of transmission can be broken. What one generation knows with certainty can become uncertain to the next, and completely unknown to the generation after that. Without continuous effort to preserve and transmit knowledge, it will be lost. In our own time, we face a paradox. We have more information available than ever before in human history. The internet puts vast libraries of knowledge at our fingertips. We can access texts that medieval scholars would have travelled months to read. We can view images of artworks from across the globe. We can hear recordings of music from every culture and era. And yet, much of this information is stored in formats that may not last. Digital storage media degrade. File formats become obsolete. Companies that host data go out of business. The internet itself, which seems so permanent, is actually quite fragile, dependent on continuous maintenance and power supplies. A major catastrophe, a massive solar flare, an electromagnetic pulse, a cascading infrastructure failure, could wipe out much of our digital heritage in an instant. The irony is that paper and parchment, clay tablets and stone inscriptions may prove more durable than our advanced digital technologies. Texts written thousands of years ago can still be read if they survive physically. But digital data from just decades ago may already be inaccessible, trapped in obsolete formats or on degraded storage media. This suggests we need to think carefully about how we preserve what we value. What do we want future generations to know about us? What wisdom have we gained that deserves to be transmitted forward? What stories, what ideas, what discoveries should we make every effort to ensure are not lost? And on a personal level, what do you wish to remember? What experiences, what insights, what moments of beauty or connection or understanding do you want to carry forward in your own memory? What stories will you tell to those who come after you? These questions need not be answered tonight, but let them drift gently through your mind as you rest. You are part of the great chain of memory, receiving from those who came before, transmitting to those who will come after. You are a keeper of memory, whether you think of yourself that way or not, and in this role, you are connected to all humanity across all time. Rest now in this connection. You're not alone, not isolated. You're part of something vast and enduring, something that transcends any individual life, any single civilization, even any particular era of human existence. Let this knowledge comfort you as you sink deeper into peaceful sleep. Chapter 22. The Songs of Lost Places. Throughout history, poets and musicians have been drawn to ruins, to lost places, to civilizations that once flourished and then fell. There is something in human nature that finds beauty in decay, meaning in loss, poetry in the impermanence of all things. The ancient Greek poet Simonides wrote of fallen cities, his verses capturing both the glory that was and the desolation that remained. The Roman poet Virgil, in the Aeneid, describes Troy in flames, a great civilization meeting its end in fire and blood. Medieval poets composed lyrics mourning the abandonment of once thriving settlements, the halls now empty, the hearths now cold. In English literature, Percy Bysshe Shelley's Ozymandias captures this theme perfectly. A traveller describes seeing in the desert the broken statue of an ancient king with an inscription boasting of his mighty works. But around the statue lies nothing but endless sand. "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair," the inscription reads. But the works are gone, leaving only the ironic permanence of the boast carved in stone. Music, too, has expressed this melancholy beauty. Folk songs from many cultures tell of lost places, sunken cities, kingdoms swallowed by the sea or buried by sand. These songs serve as memorials, keeping memory alive even when the physical places have vanished. There is a Welsh legend of Cantrea Gwaelod, a fertile lowland kingdom that was protected from the sea by a system of dikes and floodgates. But one night, the gatekeeper, drunk at a feast, failed to close the gates when the tide came in. The sea flooded through and the entire kingdom was drowned. According to the legend, on quiet nights you can still hear the church bells of Cantrea Gwaelod ringing beneath the waves. The Breton legend of Ceres tells a similar story. A beautiful city built below sea level and protected by a great dike with a single gate was ruled by King Gradlon and his daughter Dahut. But Dahut lived wickedly, and one night she was tricked by a demon into opening the gate. The sea rushed in, drowning the city and all its inhabitants except the king, who escaped on horseback, though he had to throw his daughter into the waves to save himself. These legends, like the story of Atlantis, combine historical memory of actual floods and drowned settlements with moral lessons about pride, negligence, and divine judgment. They remind us that even the most prosperous and well-defended places can be destroyed if we are not vigilant, if we abandon virtue, if we fail in our responsibilities. But there is also beauty in these stories, a poignant recognition that all things pass, that the grandest human achievements are ultimately temporary. The city drowned, but the memory remains. The kingdom fell, but the song endures. And in that endurance there is a kind of immortality, different from the physical permanence we might wish for, but perhaps more meaningful. The Japanese aesthetic concept of mono no aware captures something of this feeling. A gentle sadness at the transience of things, coupled with a deeper appreciation of their beauty precisely because they are transient. The cherry blossoms are lovely because they bloom for such a short time. The autumn leaves are precious because they will soon fall. The snow will melt, the summer will end, youth will fade, life will conclude. Rather than denying this reality or despairing at it, mono no aware invites us to embrace it, to find in transience itself a particular kind of beauty. The ruins of lost civilizations, the stories of sunken cities, the songs mourning what has passed, all of these express this awareness that impermanence and beauty are not opposites but companions. Listen now to the songs of lost places, listener. You need not hear them with your ears. Let them resonate in your heart, in your breath, in the quiet spaces between your thoughts. Ancient melodies carrying stories of glory and loss, of pride and fall, of memory and forgetting. Let these songs lull you deeper into rest, into dreams, into the peaceful darkness where all stories ultimately return. Chapter 23. The Water's Memory. Water, more than any other element, features prominently in the Atlantis story. The sea surrounds the island. Canals run through the city. Hot springs bubble up from beneath the earth. And ultimately, water is the instrument of destruction, the flood that wipes away all traces of the civilization. Water in mythology often represents both life and death, creation and destruction. It is the source from which all things emerge and the destination to which all things return. The ancient Greeks understood this duality. Poseidon, god of the sea, was both creator and destroyer, giver of prosperity through maritime trade and fishing, but also sender of storms and earthquakes and floods. The ocean itself was seen as a boundary between the known world and the unknown, between civilization and chaos. To venture out onto the open sea was to leave behind the safety of land, to enter a realm governed by different rules, where human power meant little and divine favour meant everything. But the ocean was also a highway, connecting distant lands, making possible trade and cultural exchange. The civilizations of the ancient Mediterranean were all maritime cultures, their prosperity built on their ability to travel by sea. Ships carried not just goods, but also ideas, technologies, stories, and dreams. The Atlanteans, as Plato describes them, were master sailors. Their empire extended across the ocean. They had discovered lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules. They moved freely through a realm that terrified others. Their relationship with the sea was intimate and essential to their identity. Perhaps this is why their destruction by water carries such symbolic weight. They who had mastered the sea were ultimately claimed by it. They who had treated the ocean as their highway found it becoming their grave. The element that had given them power became the instrument of their doom. Water, unlike earth, holds no permanent shape. It flows, it changes, it adapts to whatever container holds it. It can be gentle, trickling over stones in a stream, or violent, crashing in storm-driven waves against a coast. It can sustain life or end it. It can quench thirst or drown the unwary. And water, in a sense, remembers. Not consciously, of course, but the ocean holds within it dissolved minerals from every land it has touched, particles from every river that flows into it, traces of every creature that has lived and died in its depths. The water in the ocean today has been part of clouds and rain, part of rivers and glaciers, part of countless living things, over and over through billions of years. If Atlantis existed and was swallowed by the sea, then the ocean holds whatever remains of it. The dissolved minerals from its buildings, the particles of its art and architecture, all mixed now with everything else the ocean contains, diluted beyond measure but still present, still part of the vast chemical memory of the waters. This is true for everything that has ever touched water. The ocean connects all places, all times. Every raindrop that falls may contain molecules that once were part of ancient civilizations, that once flowed through the veins of dinosaurs, that once formed part of the first living cells billions of years ago. We are made mostly of water ourselves. The water in your body right now, listener, has been part of countless other forms before it became part of you. It has fallen as rain on forests and deserts. It has flowed in rivers and collected in lakes. It has been drunk by animals and absorbed by plants. It has been ice and snow, mist and fog, ocean and puddle. And when you eventually die, the water in your body will continue its endless cycle, becoming part of other things, other beings, other processes. You're not separate from the great cycles of nature, but part of them, temporary arrangements of elements that will be rearranged into new patterns. This is not sad or frightening when understood properly. It is simply the way things are, the fundamental truth of existence. We are all water flowing through different vessels, taking shape for a time and then flowing onward. Let this image soothe you now. You're flowing, changing, moving through the great cycle. There is nowhere you need to hold on, nothing you must grasp tightly. You can flow easily, naturally, following the path of least resistance down toward rest, towards sleep, toward the deep peace that underlies all temporary forms. Feel yourself like water now, formless and flowing, adapting to whatever shape the moment requires, offering no resistance, simply being, simply moving, simply resting in the eternal present that is always here, always now, always home. Chapter 24. The Eternal City. Though Atlantis fell, in Plato's account there was a survivor, or rather a victor. Ancient Athens, the city that resisted Atlantean aggression and ultimately triumphed, represents a different ideal, a different kind of civilization. While Atlantis grew wealthy and powerful, Athens, in this ancient mythical version, remained simple and virtuous. Its citizens were warriors and farmers, living according to ancient laws, uncorrupted by luxury or imperial ambition. They had enough for their needs but sought no more. They defended their land when attacked, but did not themselves seek conquest. This idealized ancient Athens represents Plato's vision of the proper society, one that maintains virtue even in the face of prosperity, that values wisdom and courage over wealth and power. It is the Republic made manifest, the philosopher kings he imagined governing not with force, but with justice and reason. The contrast with Atlantis is deliberate and instructive. Both civilizations were blessed with advantages. Both had capable people and favourable circumstances, but they made different choices. Athens chose to remain true to its founding principles. Atlantis chose to abandon virtue in favour of ambition. The result, according to the story, was that Athens endured while Atlantis fell. But this is where Plato's account becomes interesting and perhaps surprising. For while Atlantis was destroyed by earthquake and flood, Athens too was devastated. The same catastrophe that destroyed Atlantis also destroyed the Athenian army that had defeated them. Both civilizations fell. The virtuous and the wicked, the modest and the proud, the defenders and the aggressors, all were swept away by forces beyond human control. The moral lesson is complicated by this ending. Virtue did not guarantee survival. Justice did not prevent catastrophe. Perhaps the point is that physical survival is not the ultimate measure of success. Athens, though its people died well. They fought for justice, defended the innocent, resisted tyranny. Their civilization, though destroyed, was not corrupted. They remained true to their principles to the end. Atlantis, by contrast, survived longer physically, but died spiritually long before the earthquake struck. Its fall was certain from the moment its people chose power over virtue. The physical destruction was merely the external manifestation of an internal collapse that had already occurred. This reading suggests that what matters is not how long we live, but how we live. Not whether we avoid death, which is impossible, but whether we maintain our integrity in the face of death's inevitability. Not whether we build things that last forever, which we cannot, but whether we live according to principles that have eternal value. Athens, in this sense, never truly died. Though the physical city was destroyed, the idea of Athens lived on. The principles it embodied, justice, wisdom, courage, moderation, continue to inspire. The philosophical tradition it birthed through Socrates and Plato and Aristotle shaped Western civilization and continues to influence thought today. Atlantis, despite or perhaps because of its destruction, also achieved a kind of immortality. Not as a model to emulate, but as a warning to heed. Its story has been told and retold for over 2 millennia, teaching each new generation about the dangers of hubris and the importance of virtue. Both cities then, in very different ways, transcended their physical destruction. Both live on in memory and meaning. Both continue to speak to us across the vast span of time that separates us from Plato's Athens. What cities are we building now, listener? Not just physical cities of stone and steel, but cities of the mind and heart, structures of meaning and value that we hope will outlast our brief lives. Are we building cities that will fall like Atlantis, monuments to pride and excess? Or are we building cities that will endure like the idea of Athens, founded on principles that transcend any particular time or place? These are large questions, too large perhaps for this quiet moment. But let them rest gently in your awareness, not demanding answers, simply present, like distant stars visible in a clear night sky. You need not solve these riddles tonight. Simply acknowledge them, honour them, and then let them go as you drift deeper into the peaceful darkness of sleep. Chapter 25. The Inheritance of Dreams. Every story we tell, every myth we preserve, every legend we pass down through generations is a kind of inheritance. Not material wealth, but something perhaps more valuable, the accumulated wisdom, the collective dreams, the shared imagination of all who came before us. The Atlantis story is part of this inheritance. Plato received it, or created it, and passed it forward. Generation after generation has received the story, interpreted it, added their own meanings and applications, and passed it on again. We are inheritors of this tradition, participants in a conversation that spans millennia. But what exactly have we inherited? Not just the bare facts of the story, the concentric circles, the imperial ambitions, the catastrophic destruction. We have inherited something deeper, a way of thinking about civilization, a framework for understanding rise and fall, a language for discussing virtue and corruption, power and justice, permanence and change. When we hear about a society destroyed by its own excesses, we think of Atlantis. When we see evidence of ancient catastrophes, we remember the flood that drowned the island. When we contemplate the fragility of human achievements, Atlantis provides a reference point, a shorthand for a complex set of ideas and emotions. This is how cultural inheritance works. Stories, symbols, and myths give us ways of organizing and understanding our experience. They provide frameworks through which we interpret events. They offer metaphors that help us communicate subtle and complex ideas. They connect us to those who came before and to those who will come after, creating continuity across generations. But inheritance is not just passive reception. Each generation must actively take up what it has received, must interpret it in light of its own circumstances, must decide what to preserve and what to modify, what to emphasize and what to de-emphasize. The story we inherited is not identical to the story we will pass forward. We add our own layers of meaning, our own interpretations, our own connections to contemporary concerns. This is appropriate and necessary. A living tradition must adapt and evolve to remain relevant. A story that speaks only to the concerns of ancient Athens has limited value for people living in the 21st century. But a story that can be reinterpreted to address contemporary issues, environmental catastrophe, social inequality, technological hubris, political corruption, continues to live and to teach. The Atlantis story has proven remarkably adaptable. It has been read as history and as allegory, as warning and as inspiration, as tragedy and as adventure. It has been connected to real archaeological sites and to purely imaginary realms. It has been treated with scholarly seriousness and with playful creativity. All of these approaches are part of the inheritance, part of the living tradition the story represents. What will you do with this inheritance, listener? How will the Atlantis story live in you? What meanings will you find in it? What connections will you make to your own life, your own society, your own time? What will you pass forward to those who come after you? These questions too need not be answered tonight, but consider them gently as you rest. You are a link in a long chain, a carrier of stories and meanings that stretch back into deep time and forward into an unknown future. This role, this responsibility, this privilege is part of what it means to be human. And now, let all these thoughts and questions drift away like clouds. You have travelled far tonight, through time and space, through history and myth, through philosophy and dream. You have visited Atlantis in all its glory and witnessed its fall. You have contemplated deep questions and rested in ancient mysteries. It is time now to let go, to release your grip on consciousness, to surrender to sleep. Your journey tonight is complete. Whatever comes tomorrow, whatever questions remain unanswered, whatever mysteries persist, all can wait. For now, there is only this: the soft darkness, the gentle quiet, the peaceful descent into deep and restorative sleep. Rest well, dear listener. The story of Atlantis will be there when you wake, ready to teach its lessons again, ready to inspire new dreams. But for now, dream your own dreams, unburdened by the weight of lost civilizations, held gently in the eternal present where all is well, all is peaceful, all is exactly as it should be. Sleep now, sleep deeply. The ancient world releases you, the present welcomes you, and the future awaits your rested mind and renewed spirit. Good night, traveller. Good night, dreamer. Good night, keeper of stories. May your sleep be as deep as the ocean that holds Atlantis in its eternal embrace, and may you wake refreshed, renewed, and ready for whatever comes next. Good night.